Regina.
So welcome everybody to this keynote speech on the take-up of social benefits. My name is Regina Riphahn, and it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, which is Robert Moffitt. Robert got his degrees in the 1970s, and he has been a professor mostly at Brown University and afterwards at Johns Hopkins University for many years. His areas of specialization are in labor economics, public and population economics, and he's well known for his work on welfare programs. He received a number of awards and honors. Among others, he is fellow of the Econometric Society, of the Society of Labor Economists, and of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and most recently was elected member of the National Academy of Sciences. Robert published a large number of very impressive papers in the best journals, and we are very happy to have him give us this keynote speech. And therefore, without further ado, I will be happy to leave the floor to Robert.
Okay. Thank you, Regina. I'm very happy to be here and talk about a subject that I'm a long-time student of and very interested in. And so I will give my talk and leave time hopefully for questions. I'd certainly love to have comments and about anything I'm talking about, and also about programs in Germany, which I'm not an expert on. Always trying to learn more about individual countries. So I will try to share a screen, see if this works. Okay, can everyone see my slides?
I can see it, yes, thank you.
Okay, and let's see here. Let me see here. See if I can try to get this to be full screen a little bit more here. See here. Okay, well, maybe I'll just go do it. I mean, you can see the slides. Okay, so so take up social assistance programs. This is actually based upon a chapter in this handbook that GLO has produced. So that's on my website, but also available many different places. And so please take a look at the full. You're interested. Okay. A lot of economists call this the problem of the $1 on the sidewalk or €1 on the sidewalk, and the person is walking down the sidewalk and then sees one. So there it is. You see it on the sidewalk. Why not pick it up? It's right there. And so the problem is some people do not pick it up. And there's a joke that an economist says, no, everyone has to pick it up. It can't be there. You're using your imagination. So, but a lot of people don't pick up. And there are a lot of areas in economics where people don't seem to take advantage of the financial opportunities that are available to them. Lots of tax programs where people don't get the taxes, or maybe they have deductions, they don't take the deductions, or they have credits, they don't take them. A lot of people don't apply for unemployment benefits, retirement benefits, lots of applications here. And usually we assume in economics there must be there's an opportunity to have more money, so there must be something preventing people from taking up those benefits. So we kind of look for what the barriers are that would prevent that. There's a branch of this study which is really in the area of behavioral economics, which is mostly about people's psychological barriers and sometimes just misperceptions. And present bias means that they are valuing today too heavily, and they don't understand that if they do something today, which might be costly, they will get benefits tomorrow. Cognitive deficiencies means not really understanding the rules. So that's another class of barriers. So that's the kind of background and motivation. So what's called the take-up rate here is the fraction of those who are eligible. So we're only talking about people who are eligible for a program. The take-up rate is the fraction who receive the benefit. A lot of the literature actually reports one minus that, the non-take-up rate, but they can report either one, and I'll show both of those in some of these tables, but I'm mostly going to try to convert everything to a take-up rate and not a non-take-up rate. And what you find is that for most programs in most countries, these take-up rates are less than one, and they're really, in many cases, far, far below one. And that's not desirable. Obviously, these programs are intended to help families who are eligible and individuals and families. And if they don't take it up, well, you're not achieving the impact of the program you'd like. So now I should say here, just as a matter of scope of this review, and this is a review paper. I'm just trying to assemble all the take-up rates I could find, and also what all the reasons people have mentioned for non-take-up. Well, I did reduce the scope. I and my, I should say this is co-authored in Wanset Co. He's a graduate student at Johns Hopkins. We restricted ourselves to means-tested programs pretty much. Social insurance programs, the classic type of social insurance programs are contributory, and they have take-up rates, take-up issues too. Just that the reason for them are a little bit different. So we're restricting our health to mostly means-tested programs. It's not a clean distinction, actually. Some programs have elements of both. Even social insurance programs, contributed programs, often have a means test, at least for part of the benefit. In any case, there's a slight restriction here on the types of programs we're going to be looking at. Okay, so what's the outline here? I'm going to talk about measurement issues first. How to measure take-up, and then I'm going to bring a few tables. Mr. Coe and I spent a long time trying to find take-up rates around the world, as many countries as we could, and we were just looking for studies. They're not easy to find. A lot of them are not published in academic journals. They're published in government reports, but we got as many as we could, and we got them without fully understanding the programs and the reasons for take-up. And I'll talk about what we found and the little we know. And every time I give this talk, I'm always interested to say, and people telling me about their country, explaining to me why the take-up rates are low. And then I'm going to talk about the theories, and then the evidence, what we have on evidence about those theories. And then I'll say some things about what the policy implications are here, and some ideas that I and other people have thrown out for addressing this problem of a low take-up. Okay, so measuring it, just let me say right off the bat, there is one kind of non-trivial problem here that you have to kind of address, which is that the diagram I have there, I'm not going to take the time to go through it. It's the labor economics standard diagram of a hours of work choice or labor leisure choice as a function of income, and you have a budget constraint. And all these budget constraints and difference curves are meant to illustrate is that you do sometimes have endogenous labor supply, which means that people might reduce their labor supply to become eligible. That's one of the work disincentives of kind of open-ended programs. And if that occurs, how you define take-up is a little ambiguous, because the people who start off above the eligibility point are not really eligible to begin with, but they make themselves eligible by reducing their labor supply. The literature here pretty much ignores that, and they just take only the people who are eligible, and those people may have been eligible originally before the program existed or before some reform. Let's point this out. It's a little bit of an issue, because if you go out and change policies and reforms, maybe try to reduce the barriers, you might bring some new people in who were ineligible initially. So having said that, I'm going to ignore that from now on. Okay, what are the practical issues? If you've ever done this, you know how messy and difficult it is to measure take-up. And the reason is you have to measure eligibility, and you have to have some kind of data set on individuals, and for each individual calculate whether they're eligible for a program or not. And every program I've ever encountered is complicated. we simplify it and talk about, nice income cutoff, but maybe high upper income, different kinds of criteria. But if you really get involved in these programs, they're very complicated, and lots of very specific rules about what income is counted, assets, things like that. It's quite complicated. So most of our data set that we use to estimate eligibility aren't perfect, to put it mildly, in getting it all right. I mean, programs have their own definitions of these incomes. For example, they have their own definitions of who in the family counts and needs to be included for the purposes of eligibility. So there are lots of complications there. There's a timing issue. Someone walks into a benefit office and the office will require them to report their income over some period, last month or last year or several months, and our data may not be appropriate to get that timing right. It's really a big problem for recertification. Recertification, and again, every program in the world is different, but in almost all programs, at some point, the individual or family has to go in and recertify to say, I still have low income, I am still eligible, my circumstances have not changed. And that always happens at a very kind of discretionary point. When exactly the program requires that differs from program to program, but getting the eligibility right at exactly the same point when recertification takes place. So the last bullet there is an even more complicated issue. A lot of programs, and I think some in Germany, you can correct me on this, have activity requirements. You have to be searching for a job or possibly even accept a job offer of some certain kind. And if a person doesn't comply with those requirements, should we just say they're ineligible? They decided, I'm not going to accept that job offer, I'm not going to search, and they're not allowed to participate. Or is that just a take-up issue? They've decided, I'm not going to take this up. There's a barrier, count that as a barrier, that they have to overcome to search for work, and they're not going to do it. Again, from a measurement standpoint, we almost never have data on whether somebody's been offered a job or what the program rules are. So that's so there are a lot of complications here. That was about eligibility, and there are also issues about calculating who actually receives the benefits and how many people are accepting the benefits. And that's a problem if you collect the data from surveys, because people may not report it accurately, or they may not report it at the same time. Again, there's a timing issue. When to ask them, did you receive a benefit last month, last quarter, last year? That may not align with whether eligibility is calculated. There have been some studies, a lot of studies actually, which get administrative data from the government. The government will have numbers on how many people are receiving the benefit, and that's presumably more accurate. That should be fairly accurate. The government makes mistakes too, but still, at least it does not rely on a survey report. And there are some studies here which have used administrative data for the counts, and those still show low take-up rates. So that's not, so just underreporting of receipt and benefits from survey doesn't seem to be the main problem here. Another very common occurrence is that when you do one of these calculations and you calculate eligibility, you find that there's some people who say they're receiving benefits, but you calculate them to be ineligible. And so what's going on there? You don't know what's going on. Maybe you probably presume you made a mistake. Either the data are wrong and they aren't really receiving benefits, or maybe you calculated eligibility incorrectly. You calculated them ineligible when in fact they're eligible. Or it could be the government made a mistake. The government's not perfect on this either. So I'll talk a little more about that. But so lots of practical issues here. Let me just say here, this is kind of the end of the measuring part. So there are lots of problems here, but the take-up rates we're going to find are sometimes really, really low. And it seems a little implausible that these low take-up rates could be entirely the result of just measurement problems. And I mean, you can't prove, it's very difficult to prove that. Of course, your numbers could all these numbers could be wrong from every country, but it seems unlikely. Exactly how big the measurement problems are, I don't know. I would say maybe 10 percentage points either way. That's just a wild guess about how the take-up rates could be affected by these measurement problems. but you don't want to overlook the measurement problems. Having said this, I'm going to now ignore the measurement problems and act as if the take-up rates are accurate. Okay, so as I say, Mr. Coe and I got as many as we could, and we have a lot of take-up rates from Europe. In fact, there are more from Europe than from anywhere else. But we got take-up rates from countries in Asia, North America, and Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, places like that. I found quite a few, maybe more than I expected. So here's some ones from Germany, and like I said at the beginning, I am not an expert on most European programs, and including these in Germany. My understanding is that these two I've listed in the beginning, the minimum income or Sozialhilfe, and the next one, income support, to help with some Lebensunterhalt, that those were kind of one modified or transitioned into the other one, that they're both kind of minimum income programs. If you look at the take-up rates over in the last column in one of these is by Professor Riphahn, is 48% and 41 to 48%. A range there was given in that study in 1991, 37%, 37%, 33%. It kind of looks like they're dropping, and maybe in the discussion period, people can comment on whether that seems accurate and why they're dropping. I don't know. There's some other programs listed there, which I don't know the SGB one very well. I've forgotten exactly what that is. The unemployment benefit, my understanding there, that's the Arbeitslosengeld, is not just a social insurance program, not just contributory. My understanding is that even if you haven't contributed, that you're still eligible. I can be happy to be corrected on that too. That's 44%. So you see, all of these are less than 50%. These are really low take-up rates, and it's a problem. You really would prefer these to be much higher. We have some from France, and again, we can talk about Germany. I know in France, over the years, they've slowly moved a little bit more toward in-work benefits, and you see the activité down about 2/3 of the way down the activité. Those refer to activity. You have to be active in the labor market to receive benefits. So that's been a trend in France. The one there in the middle, 2010, 2011, that in-work benefit there, only 32% participation rate, which is one of the really lowest ones. They have reformed it, so my understanding, in the last row there has their new in-work benefit. You have much higher participation rates there. Why? I'm not sure. In-work benefits are always a problem because you have to report your earnings. There's additional bureaucratic barrier, and you have to have really good systems for collecting earnings and the program has to collect earnings information and process it. So it's typically a little bit more of a burden to do that. I know in the UK, I don't really have them in the UK here. They had really big problems because a person to receive in-work benefits had to go to their employer, and every time they changed their employer, they had to register with the employer, and the employer had to contact the tax authorities because it was operated in the tax system. A lot of paperwork and bureaucratic obstacles, problems, barriers. And the UK has basically dropped it. They don't have that anymore. United States, we've never tried it. We have never tried to involve the employer. Okay, we have in-work benefits, but they operate by the family filing taxes, and they report their earnings, and the tax authorities calculate it. The employer is never involved. Anyway, that's an issue with in-work benefits. But anyway, the French ones, you can see some of these are a little bit higher. You see some 160, 70%, even find one. Housing is kind of interesting. Housing benefit, they're almost 100% benefit. I don't know that program in France very well. And housing, a lot of it is whether or not, first of all, as a housing benefit is provided to everyone who needs one. And lots of times there aren't enough housing units to do that. Whether it's operated through vouchers or not is exactly how it operates is a big issue. So the nature of the program for housing matters a lot. I know at least that much. You can look at the paper where I have a lot of other countries here: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, and then I also Greece, Ireland, Luxembourg, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland. Found take-up rates from all these countries. And if you look at these, they vary all over the map. And maybe if I had 2 or 3 more years, I would go through every one of these programs, talk to people in the country, and try to figure it out. I wasn't that ambitious, so but there's obviously a big range here, and very interesting if one could really make these cross-country comparisons. But a lot of them, the point is, a lot of them are very low. Like they were in Ireland, the family income supplement, 25% or 23%. So you find some really low ones. You find some high ones too. Quite a bit of variation there. The Netherlands also. So anyway, you can look at my paper and go through to take a look at these programs. As I say, my paper has estimates also from other countries around the world, North America. Ours in the United States are occasionally high, but usually in the range of about 50% to 60%, something like that. New Zealand has some fairly high ones, and so does Australia. One of the differences in some of these countries, and again, I don't know the German situation very well, is that a lot of them are operated through agencies which are very, very good at contacting people in their administrative databases. And so if the government has a really good administrative database with data on all the people in the country, and if they can identify who is low income, it's much more easy to contact people and tell them, please apply for this benefit. The United States is one of the worst on that. We don't have any national administrative databases, and there are a lot of very poor families, and they're not in any database anywhere. Even if the government wanted to try to contact them and say, why aren't you applying? Well, please apply. There's no way to contact them. We don't know who they are. They don't file taxes because our tax system exempts most people, and we just don't collect data on them. So I know that Australia is very good at that. They really have good administration, but a lot of European countries have good at. I have some notes here on some other countries, lower income countries: China, Brazil, India. They all have really interesting programs, and I have only a paragraph in the paper. Those typically are very difficult to operate. These lower income countries don't have all the administrative data systems that higher income countries do. And so a lot of the assessment of eligibility is informal at the local level or the village level. In China, the Big Deal Bao program, it's a massive program. I mean, that's one of the biggest programs in the entire world in terms of number of people. The village leaders, the village chiefs are the ones who decide who's eligible or not, and the criteria are very murky. So it's a really different category. Very interesting programs, though. Okay, so what are the theories for why people don't take up? I'll classify them into 5 categories here. First of all, maybe just benefits are too low. Secondly, is this thing called hassle. If you know that English word, participation, recertification, cost. The word there, operative word, is cost. There's some cost or barrier, and it's all about just difficulties in going through the application procedures and participation procedures. And then there's a matter of information and uncertainty. And there's this thing called stigma, which I'll talk about. And then program constraints is another one from the program side. So here's the general framework, the general idea. So you have kind of a two-sided problem here. The family is trying to decide, assuming they know about the program at all, whether to decide. And, as economists, we think people, should do what's best for themselves. And so they're making a calculation. Is it worth participating or not? And so the utilities, there's some utility of participation, but it's net of cost. There might be a very heavy cost there of some kind, and it could be a stigma cost or a real cost. I'll talk about that. And then your utility of not participating, and the families participate. that's very simple. And when you get to the actual implementation of this idea, well, it's really perceived, it's, what their perceptions are. And you get into behavioral economics there. What are people's kind of perceptions of what the value is be? And then there's uncertainty in information. Maybe they don't know the rules, so they aren't sure they're eligible. So when they're calculating, thinking about applying, calculating that utility, well, maybe a lot of uncertainty, and the cost may be too great given the uncertainty about whether they're eligible or not. They may need to know what the benefit is going to be. The benefit calculation might be very complicated, and until they actually get apply, maybe they won't know that. So then on the other side, there's the program operator. They could make errors. The problem there is that to establish eligibility, it's often a very complicated matter, and the government program has to decide how much money they're going to spend and how much effort they're going to put in to getting all the income right, all the assets right. Maybe there'll be administrative databases to assess that, but if you're relying on people's self-reports, the government has to decide how much am I going to try to document this and get verification. Some of our programs in the United States, you have to submit if you're working, you have to submit some piece of paper that is from the employer, which documents how much you're earning. You have to get the bank to supply a piece of paper. You have to might document that you're married to someone or not married. Lots of paperwork involved. And you can see why the government will do this. They're trying to get all their rules exactly right and who's eligible and who's not eligible. But some programs in some countries spend a lot of effort in doing that, and others don't. And how much effort they spend will affect whether or not these barriers are large or small. So, and then on the individual, that comes back to the individual side, because assuming people know something about how much effort is going to be required and how much documentation and verification is going to be required, that can deter them from participation. So it's kind of a interplay here between the program and what they decide to do and what the individuals decide to do. Well, okay, those are all general points. So what about these possible causes? Well, no benefits. So there are always some costs, and so the benefits might be too low. And if you have a program where the benefits decline with income, for example, and higher income people, families are only getting a small benefit, well, maybe the benefit is so small that even minor costs will deter them from applying and participating. So it could be low benefits, and talk a little bit more about that. On the cost side, there are a lot of different types here. I've already alluded to some of them. This hassle cost, that English word hassle, this means a lot of effort. You have to go through a lot of verification and do a lot of this small things that just require time and effort. And this is up to the different by program, but just a lot of work to do this. And that's what that refers to. I mean, there can actually be actual monetary costs if you have to actually physically go to the office. I don't know about Germany. In the United States, a lot of our programs now allow you to do online application. You don't physically have to go down to the office, or you don't have to at least immediately. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And time costs, obviously, if you have to physically go to an office, that's time. And for example, you're working, well, that time away from work, does your employer let you do that? Another big issue in a lot of these countries is whether or not the welfare office is open in the evening or on weekends, so that if you do have to make a physical trip, people who are working can go. If you have children, well, you're going to take your children along with you, or you're going to look for daycare. These are, for low-income families, these are very big costs, potentially very large costs. The effort there, just more words, they're filling out the forms, understanding the rules, and dealing with these costs can be smaller. I should say there, behavioral economics comes into play there, because filling out the forms and understanding the rules does require, some levels of education and cognitive ability. Sometimes these forms are very complicated. They might use language, which is maybe for a college graduate or someone with more education, and people who don't have high levels of literacy or maybe low levels of education. They just have a very hard time understanding it. And to them, there's a lot of work in trying to understand that. So a lot of behavioral economics concepts come into the effort. So I mentioned more money cost there, time cost. And then again, there's a distinction between the cost of applying and the ongoing cost of participation. So even after you apply and maybe you're accepted, then periodically you have to go through the whole thing again and recertify everything, depending upon the program rules. Most programs don't require you to do quite as much documentation for recertification as you did when you first came in, but some of them do. So you have to do this over and over and over again. And the more frequent it is, the more work it is to participate. A lot of people, again, I don't know the European programs that well. In the United States, a lot of people drop off of the program. They don't comply with the recertification. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, research evidence, but they're on, and as far as we can tell, nothing really happens with their income or assets, but they just don't recertify, and they drop off, and sometimes they come back on later, but there's a lot of turnover, people moving on and off the programs in a bunch of these countries. So that's probably maybe because of these costs. That's a leading explanation. Information, lack of knowledge, eligibility, you just may not know, and that there's a big range there. You may be completely unaware the program even exists. And my second bullet there, is related to that. If there's no one else in your neighborhood or your local area who's on the program, you may not know about it at all, and there's no way for you to gather that information. On the other hand, if you live in a neighborhood where a lot of people are receiving, you're probably going to get information about it. So it might very well depend upon your local participation as far as information goes. But even if you know the program exists, as I said before, knowing exactly what the eligibility rules are and how they're going to apply to you, you may know some other people or recipients of the program, but their circumstances are different than yours. And you say, well, maybe there's some reason they're eligible and I may not be. So that's uncertainty, even if you know about the program. And the rules are just complex, and it's very hard to tell. Now, in theory, you should be able to go in and find out, but if you know that there are barriers, having lack of information is just another barrier that might lead you not to apply. This thing called stigma. So stigma refers to the self-embarrassment or the kind of fact that you're stigmatized, that is to say, embarrassed in some kind of personal way from being a recipient of a transfer program benefit. And I worked on this a little bit a long time ago, but and I can say I don't think I have really done work that identifies this. It's a very difficult problem. A lot of the original work on stigma, you just go ask people, and a lot of people say, I'm embarrassed, I don't want to be a welfare recipient. Anyway, I've called this internal stigma. And to some extent, if you think that everyone out there in society doesn't like people on benefit, and you're aware of that, you kind of internalize that. Those are the social norms out there, and you kind of feel that way yourself. I call that internal stigma because you're kind of inferring from what other people's opinions are, something about yourself, and you may feel negative self-worth, loss of self-esteem, I put there, because of that. That's a little different from the fact that other people find out that you're a benefit, because the internal stigma, you could be stigmatized even if no one knows it. You feel bad about being dependent upon government for a benefit. But if other people know about it, that's even more concrete. How they know about it, well, people in your neighborhood may find out, or maybe you have to go to the welfare office if somebody sees you, the benefit office. So every program is different in that extent. But a lot of people, I think, when they think of stigma, they're thinking about the external, that people see you and they identify you. as being a recipient. A lot of this depends upon the fourth bullet there, how many other people are on. Now, that came up once before, because if there are a lot of people in your neighborhood are on welfare, you might be more likely, and that's what we're going to observe in the data. We're going to observe the data if other people are in your neighborhood, in your social group, in your peer group, are on receiving benefit, then you are more likely to. We don't really know if that's a matter of information, because that's the way I referred to it before, information. You know about the program because other people around you are on it. Or it could be stigma, that if everyone else is on the program, well, I don't feel bad about it. Everyone else is too. And I have this multiple equilibria. There's a literature on social interactions, and if no one else is on, then that kind of, it might deter you from participating as well. So you have cases where no one is on and hard to get out of that equilibrium, or cases where everybody is on, and in which case you might be stable with that equilibrium. Okay, so that's stigma. And then the program constraints, well, there are the errors that people make. I referred to that before as a program constraint. But it may be some of these programs, they don't have enough money for everyone. It's a quota system. I can talk more about those programs. I don't know, again, in Germany, whether your programs have limits like this. Okay, one note on heterogeneity here. Who participates and who not. It's a very big issue in the U.S. and in some other countries. I haven't seen this talked about everywhere, is who participates and who doesn't. What you hope is, at least that the people who participate are the neediest, the lowest income, the most disadvantaged families, and the people who don't participate are the higher income families. Of course, nobody's high income, but at least somewhat higher income and better off. So you want the program to serve the neediest families first, and you should kind of expect that on the basis of that general framework where people decide to join because it's a great benefit to them. So the neediest and most disadvantaged families should have the greatest need. But there's some evidence it doesn't go go that way. And in particular, when we talk about all those costs, filling out forms, going down and understanding the government and dealing with the bureaucracy and all the forms, sometimes the most disadvantaged families find that to be most difficult. And then there's a behavioral economics discussion of this. You might end up finding that the neediest families are the ones who don't participate the most. So I'll talk about that on the evidence. Okay, so I want to leave time for questions. So let me kind of quickly review the evidence. First of all, a lot of studies out there, and there's several of these, and more actually in Europe than other countries. We just ask people, why aren't you participating? It looks like you're eligible. And you get answers which are consistent with all those explanations. Some people say, I didn't know. Well, that's information. Some people say, I don't need it. I can get along without it. Well, that's kind of the benefits too low, would take too much time. Okay, well, that's the time cost, not worth the hassle, not worth it. Offices are too far away. That's a cost. It would feel like begging. Okay, there you talk about stigma. I don't want to look like I'm begging. So it would not be good at participation when known around, because that's external stigma if other people find out about it. What about benefits? If you just run regressions of take up on the potential benefit a person could receive, you usually get a positive coefficient on that benefit variable by and large. So that kind of supports the kind of standard theory, but not all the time. Sometimes sometimes what you find is the coefficient on the benefit is positive, but then you break it down. Sometimes you go to the worst off people who have the greatest benefits, but they have low income and low education. Sometimes the participation rate, the take-up rate drops when you go down to the very bottom. There are a number of studies which have shown that, and including a couple in Europe. And some studies have tried to figure out why that is. And it seems one study actually tried to estimate people's cognitive ability, and thought that was part of the reason. Cost of application, this has been documented over and over again, including in Germany. Can be very, very large. United States, we have some programs. The SNAP program is the food stamp program, interesting program. But back in the 2000s, they really made a big effort to reduce the cost of application. They simplified the forms, made them easier to read, didn't ask as much information. They had billboards in the neighborhoods. They spent a huge amount of time making it easier to apply, and it did increase the take-up rate. So that's just kind of evidence, maybe for the obvious, that these costs can be very important. There's been a lot of studies, at least in the U.S., on recertification, and lots of tests of how to make recertification easier to do. And usually they have an impact on take-up, and it's just much. So I think there's just very, very strong evidence that these costs are very onerous, and if you can reduce them, that will increase participation. Information, I have a lot of bullets here, and the different studies here. Information can be important, and if you provide people information that they're eligible, and they might be eligible for a positive benefit, often you'll find increases in take-up rate. The third bullet there, one study found that people who were in a neighborhood which was cut off from other neighborhoods, they didn't know about it, give them information, a lot of them apply for it. The fifth bullet there is kind of important because a number of studies provide information. Okay, we think you're eligible, but sometimes information is not enough. Some of these studies have gone and said, you're eligible, and we're also going to help you apply. We're going to provide you with a counselor, or someone will come in and help you go through all those forms and applications. The one study there, that last bullet was a German child care program, and they found that really providing the information, but plus assistance to help people, was actually the most powerful thing they could do and increase take-up. There's this thing called nudges, if you're familiar with behavioral economics. Just send people a letter. It's usually these are pure information tests. Send people a letter, or kind of send them an email or something like that. Some little things to try to make them aware. The evidence is very mixed. Those are very cheap things to do. They don't always bring in that many people. So, but there's a literature there. It certainly would be nice if you could do very cheap things to kind of give people information and get a lot of increase in take-up. I don't think, my view is the evidence is not there, really there. On stigma, the evidence, it's really hard to measure stigma. How do you measure it? You can ask people. The one thing we do find, as I already said a couple of times, is that if you look at take-up, if other people, a lot of other people, and we can measure that in the data, we go to the neighborhood, how many other people are on the benefit? If a lot of other people are on benefit, you're also more likely to be on benefit. Now, whether that's information or stigma is hard to disentangle. So I would say we don't know how important stigma is. There's no question stigma, but how important is it relative to the other factors, like all those barriers and cost of application? I don't think we know that. It's been very hard to determine. Anyway, I have some little policy options here. First, go after non-recipients who are, I think Australia does this. I mentioned them. They have one agency which has all the government programs. Okay, so what they can do is they can find out, okay, somebody is on this program, program A, but it looks like they're also eligible for program B. So let's contact them and say, hey, we are receiving program A, but you're also eligible for B. So they're in the government system already. So it's a way to contact people. Media campaigns, I don't have but reducing complexity, that's obviously something you should be able to do. As I said, in one U.S. program, we tried that, and it did have an impact. It simplified the forms. A lot of things I know in the U.S. we're doing is you go in, you put offices in the neighborhood, and people can walk down the street. And in fact, we had one program, you walk down the street and you walk in the door and have all these computers, and there'll be somebody to help you sit down at the computer and type in your application online. And that's an example of something that just lowers the cost. Expedited processing, actual recertification, so actually helping people do it And that costs, the things, all these things cost money, and the government has to be willing to do it and spend the money to do it. And a lot of governments don't seem to be doing it. Let me just stop and say, with the last one here, reducing non-take-up difficult. And the second bullet there, it needs dedication. You've got to give the government agencies to commit to this. They have to be willing to address this problem. And maybe the kind of thing they're not used to doing. They have to have a sustained effort. It's not just a one-time effort to simplify the program and bring in the non-take-up families. You have to continue it, and you have to devote some resources to make to helping people and contacting people, bringing them in. So there is resources and budget involved, and a lot of these agencies don't have a lot of money to begin with, and they feel as though they're spending all their time just trying to run the program the ordinary way, and spending more time to kind of help people apply to something they don't easily do. So anyway, that's kind of a run through here. So that's the last slide there. So maybe I'll stop sharing, and Professor Riphahn, maybe I can take any questions from you or anyone else who might want to have some thoughts on take-up. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Robert, for this very nice presentation. Get a round of applause from me and probably from everybody else who we don't see. Now we have time for some questions. I'm not sure whether people want to contact me in the chat and send me any questions that you may have on this very nice survey of take-up behavior. So you already pointed out, Robert, that there's lots of evidence for different programs all over the world. And my first question would be, do you believe that governments care about non-take-up behavior? Because maybe they make everything so complicated to make sure that the expenses are not too high. What's your impression on this?
Do you think they're aware of it at all? Is that what his question is?
Yeah, whether they would agree to try to work against non-take-up. Do they want high take-up?
Yeah, different in different countries. Be honest, I don't see that it's a big objective, of a lot of government agencies here. And I know I was talking to some people in New Zealand and who did these calculations, and they're spending all their time just going into the government agency and talking to the people, the government operators there, and telling them, here are the numbers, and here are the reasons for it, and just kind of giving over that barrier and educating the government agency about the problem is like the first step. And it seems very difficult. In our food stamp program in the United States, they kind of became, every government agency, I know in the United States, we have some government agencies who are very attuned to this problem, and others, like, they're not attuned at all. And they just aren't aware of it. It's not on their radar screen. It's not part of their objective. But our food stamp agency, for example, they've always really wanted to say, we want everybody to participate. It's just a kind of a bureaucratic attitude they have. And but we have other agencies where, no, we're not going to help people. Our job is to just offer it out there. If they don't want to take it, that's their problem. It's a different attitude. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the kind of related to a little bit of what you're asking.
Yes, yeah, probably you're right. It depends, and it varies across different agencies and across countries. Another issue is whether it matters. In my research, we found that very often people who do not take up the benefits do have very small claims. If you have a claim of €5 a month, then it's completely rational not to take it up. And it's a challenge to argue at what point non-take-up is a real problem affecting the welfare of the individuals, and at what point it's okay, it's rational.
Yeah, that definitely. That's I guess my view is that's not the only problem. And you have people with significant benefit, who are not participating. But that's completely rational. If you, I mean, another problem related to that, and I don't, again, you can tell me if this is an issue in Germany or not. In the U.S., a problem is that people's incomes are fluctuating, and they're moving in and out of the labor market, taking jobs. And so you might have a job and you're eligible for such a small benefit, it's not worth applying. But then maybe you go through a period of unemployment, and then you have to decide, okay, now I would get a bigger benefit, but is it worth going through this if I think I'm going to get a job again, later, in maybe a few weeks or 3 months, and in which case I'll again be eligible for a small benefit or not much benefit. And some of the take up may be because people think they're temporarily, temporarily eligible, but kind of in a permanent sense, not really eligible for a very big benefit. And that was also hard. That's kind of related to it. So but haven't you? I mean, if you look at take up rates by the very worst off, lowest income, a little higher, a little higher, a little higher. It's usually the right, sign on that correlation, but not always. I don't know. What do we think in Germany? Is it?
Yeah, it certainly take up increases with the claims that people have.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool.
But we also did research when we checked on misreporting, where we could merge survey data on the question, do you receive minimum income benefits, with administrative data that told us the truth, whether these individuals did actually receive minimum income benefits. Then that allows you to check which are the characteristics of the people who lie about it. Yeah.
What you have evidence on how important that is for German programs? How much the take-up rate goes up if you use administrative counts of recipients instead of their survey reports?
Yes, we did that. We matched the data, and then the people who are closest to the labor market tend to misreport the most.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's quite interesting if you can actually see what they answer.
They're underreporting their person. Okay. Okay. Is that okay? Is the misreporting because they don't want to report? Okay.
It's possible. There's always the timing issue. The date of the survey may not be exactly the date when you receive the benefits, but we checked that, yes. So I would like to invite the audience, if there's anybody having a question on the take up of benefits, maybe based on your information from your own countries, please put something in the chat or just speak up. Yeah, it's an important topic, and I'm sure take up and non-take up varies even within country across the programs. We have that in Germany. There are programs which are very complicated, and then there are programs which are easier to get access to, and then take up and non-take up can vary substantially between programs.
Yeah, let me say one thing to the audience. If any of you, I know Professor Riphahn, you of course done a lot of work on this, but any of the rest of you have done work on this or no studies in your country, please email them to me. And I'm constantly, trying to find out more. As I said before, it's sometimes difficult to find these studies, and if they're not published in a, easily a journal that, is easily to. I just found out Spain. I really had a really hard time in Spain and finding any, and I contacted some economists there, and finally they pointed me to the ministry in Spain who's in charge of this, and they just approved, of course, all in Spanish. So I used my translation, but anyway, I'll just say if anybody knows, if you have personal knowledge of take-up studies, please email me.
Yes. Okay. So we in Germany just had a recent reform, and the main point was to make the social minimum income more friendly. And we hope that this also will increase or improve the take-up rates, but it only starts in January at best.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Was I right there that the take-up rate did fall over for several years in that minimum income?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say anything reliable because typically the data sources vary. And if you have different surveys, then it may be the way people are asked and the sample, and it's challenging to compare over time. I wouldn't be able to tell.
Okay, okay. Well, if you have something describing that reform, you said it's gonna, this next January is when January is?
Yeah, it's not yet put into law, but the proposal is there, and the main idea is to soften the state's stance towards the minimum income recipients and be more friendly. So
Okay.
possibly that will also increase take-up.
Okay, okay. Oh, are they planning to kind of try to measure take-up to see what impact it had? No.
Not yet. They are still working on the details on how to evaluate it. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, well, we have a hard time persuading our agencies to try to measure the effect of some change they're doing, and it's not always easy. Well, that sounds good. And that's the minimum income. That's the minimum income.
Yeah, that's the unemployment benefit too.
Benefit. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Okay, I don't see any questions from the audience, and nobody is raising a hand. So our time is up. Then let me thank you very much for this very nice presentation. Very interesting to see the survey of it all. And I will say goodbye and have a nice conference to everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much for letting me talk about the subject. And